In a small town nestled between rolling hills and open fields, there was a quiet cemetery that few people visited during the weekdays. Most graves were aged, weathered by time, their names fading with the years. But one grave was different. Every morning just after sunrise, a single fresh flower lay gently placed at its headstone. Rain or shine, winter frost or summer heat, the ritual never broke. At first, the locals thought a devoted widow or grieving parent must be responsible. But what they discovered was far more unexpected and deeply moving. It started when Martha, the elderly groundskeeper, noticed the flowers during her morning rounds. She'd been working at the cemetery for over a decade and knew the rhythms of the place. She was meticulous, always sweeping the leaves, trimming grass, and making sure the grave sites remained respectfully tended. But this one grave, marked with the name Elena Rose Carter, was never touched by family or friends, not anymore. Elena had passed 5 years earlier, and over time her visitors dwindled to none. That's why the appearance of flowers caught Martha's attention. At first she assumed maybe a neighbor or friend from long ago had returned, but after a week of spotting fresh daisies, tulips, and occasionally a single red rose, her curiosity grew too strong to ignore. Determined to uncover the mysterious mourner, she arrived earlier one morning, hiding behind the hedges that lined the wrought iron fence. What she saw took her breath away. Padding quietly up the gravel path was a medium-sized dog, scruffy, golden-furred, with sad but intelligent eyes. In his mouth he gently held a daffodil. He moved with care and intention, limping slightly on his left front paw as he made his way to the grave. When he reached it, he sat solemnly before the headstone, tail still, body silent. Then, with the gentlest motion, he placed the flower on the ground. After a few minutes, he lowered his head, let out a faint whine, and rested beside the grave as if mourning. Only after sitting in stillness for what seemed like forever did he rise and quietly turn back the way he came. Vanishing through the trees, Martha stood frozen in disbelief, her heart clenching at the sight. A dog, visiting a grave. Not once, but regularly. Carrying flowers. And mourning. The next day she came again. And the next. And every time, just as the sun began to rise, the same dog appeared, always carrying a flower. Sometimes wildflowers, picked from the field, other times someone's garden bloom. Always different, always thoughtful. Word began to spread through the town. The story was too remarkable to ignore. A few skeptical neighbors set up cameras, expecting to find someone, placing the flowers for the dog, maybe training him as a trick. But the footage only confirmed what Martha had seen. The dog, alone, found the flowers and made his way to the grave every day. Soon, people began calling him Flower. Children whispered stories about him at school. Local news picked it up, dubbing him the loyal mourner. But no one knew who he belonged to. He wore no collar, had no tags. Animal control tried to catch him once, hoping to bring him in for health checks, but he was too clever and quick. Still, he never missed his morning routine. It was a mystery that captivated everyone, but for Flower it wasn't a mystery at all. For him it was simple. Elena Rose Carter was his world. She had been the one who saved him from a shelter when he was just a frightened puppy, shivering and sick. She named him Milo back then. She gave him love, warmth, and a place to call home. For years they had been inseparable. She would sing to him, hold him during storms, feed him bits of her sandwich when she thought no one was looking. Her laughter was the sound that filled his days, her hands always gentle. But one day Elena left and didn't come back. He remembered how she had kissed his head and told him she'd see him soon. He waited by the door for hours, then days. Her scent faded from the house. Strangers came and packed up her things. Eventually, someone opened the door and let him out. He ran, searching, sniffing, crying. Weeks passed. Then one day, he caught her scent again, faint, but real. He followed it to the cemetery, to the stone that carried her name. He knew it was her. Somehow he just knew. So he stayed, and every day since, he brought her a gift, a flower. The only way he knew to say, "I remember, I love you." As weeks turned into months, Flower's presence became part of the town's rhythm. Visitors left extra flowers near the gates for him to carry. Bakers brought scraps of bread and meat to place by the fence. Children left notes with hand-drawn hearts saying, "We love you, Flower." One day, a little girl named Sophie, no older than 6, asked her mother why the dog kept coming back. "Because he still loves her," her mother said quietly, holding back tears. "Even after she's gone." "But she's not here anymore," Sophie whispered. "He knows," her mom replied. "But love doesn't end just because someone's gone." And so Flower became a symbol, not just of grief but of love that endures, through seasons, through silence, even through loss. His quiet loyalty stirred hearts, reminding people of the bonds we take for granted. It wasn't just a dog with a flower. It was a love story. And for those who watched him from behind fences or through camera lenses, the sight of a dog, worn and aging, making his way down that gravel path each morning, flower in mouth, never failed to bring tears. For this was no ordinary dog, and this was no ordinary goodbye. The sun had barely risen over the sleepy town, casting its soft golden glow across rooftops and treetops. Dew still clung to the grass, glistening like tiny diamonds. And down the familiar gravel path of the old cemetery, the gentle sound of paw steps could be heard, soft, deliberate, and full of purpose. Flower was on his way. He held a tiny white daisy in his mouth this morning, plucked from someone's garden just beyond the field. It trembled slightly between his teeth as he walked, with a limp still evident from his aging joints. But nothing could stop him from reaching Elena's grave. Not pain, not time, not the confusion of strangers who watched him with tearful eyes. A small crowd had started to form near the edge of the cemetery lately, not too close to disturb him, but near enough to witness the sacred moment. Some stood silently with their hands folded. Others wiped at their eyes. No one dared approach. They understood even without words that what they were witnessing was something pure, something holy in its own small way. Martha, the old groundskeeper, was among them every morning now. Her eyes, which had seen so much in her long years, always welled up as Flower gently placed the flower at the headstone, sat still beside it, and pressed his forehead to the earth. Martha had taken it upon herself to care for Flower from a distance. She set out food near the back of the cemetery, far from where he mourned, and left a bowl of clean water. At first, he wouldn't touch it. But over time, he began to eat, carefully, cautiously. He never lingered long. After each visit to Elena, he would disappear into the trees again, vanishing like a spirit. No one knew exactly where he went. Some speculated he lived in the woods, maybe under an old barn or deep in a hollow tree trunk. Others said he had been seen near the lake, sleeping, beneath a bench where he and Elena used to walk together. But no one could follow him for long. Every attempt at capture or care that crossed into intrusion was met with Flower's quiet retreat. He would not be caught. He would not be owned. He belonged only to Elena. Soon, townspeople began to leave flowers for him near the cemetery gate. Roses, lilies, marigolds, sunflowers. There were even small bouquets wrapped in ribbon with notes that read, "For Elena." It was as if the whole town began to grieve with him, to carry a part of his sorrow. Flower would sort through the pile gently, selecting just one each day, as if he somehow understood the gesture behind each bloom. A retired teacher named Walter began sketching the scene from afar. His drawings, captured in delicate pencil lines, showed the silhouette of the golden dog seated beside the headstone, always with a flower in his mouth or resting beneath his paw. Walter posted one online, and within days, it went viral. The post read, "Every day this dog walks to the same grave. He carries a flower, he stays, he mourns. We don't know how long he'll keep doing this, but we know we are changed because we saw it." Thousands of people shared the post. Some wrote poems. Others told stories of their own pets, their own losses. Some even drove from neighboring towns just to witness it, but for Flower none of the attention mattered. His world was simple. It was Elena, the stone, the flower, the moment of silence, the memory. One gray morning, rain fell in slow, steady drops, turning the path to mud and chilling the air. Still, Flower came. His fur was soaked through, and the daisy he carried was slightly crushed from the wet ground. But he came. He laid it down. He sat. The water streamed down his back, collecting around his paws, but he did not move. Martha brought out an old umbrella and stood nearby, shielding him. She didn't dare approach, but she wanted to keep him dry. Her eyes blurred as she watched the old dog tremble, but not from fear, from devotion. This was more than loyalty. This was love with no end, no expiration. Later that evening she wrote, in her journal, "I used to think only people could grieve this deeply. But now I understand. Grief is the price of love. And love, true love, lives in dogs too." That same week, a young boy named Evan, barely 10 years old, visited the cemetery with his father. Evan had lost his puppy to illness a few months before, and hadn't spoken much since. He carried a sunflower and asked to place it near Elena's grave for the dog. As he set it down, Flower approached slowly, paused, and licked the boy's hand. Evan burst into tears. He clung to his father, and, for the first time in weeks, he whispered, "I miss Max." That moment was shared in town like folklore. Flower had given Evan a piece of his heart, a gentle reminder that love is never truly gone. It just changes shape. In the weeks that followed, more stories surfaced. A young couple proposed near Elena's grave, saying the dog's devotion had reminded them what real love meant. An elderly man estranged from his son decided to reach out and rebuild their bond. A local rescue shelter received more volunteers and adoptions than ever before, inspired by the story of one golden dog's daily journey. The town changed, not in big, flashy ways, but in soft, lasting ones. People walked slower. They noticed flowers more. They hugged their pets tighter. They said, "I love you" more often, afraid of wasting time. And still, every morning, just as the sun peeked over the trees, Flower would return, always with a bloom, always with the same quiet grace. He didn't know he had become a symbol. He didn't know the town loved him now, as much as he had loved Elena. He only knew that somewhere beneath the earth, beyond the stone and the grass and the rain, his best friend rested. And he would honor her, every single day. The cemetery had never known so much attention. Once a quiet resting place nestled at the edge of the town, it had become sacred ground for reasons no one could have predicted. All because of a golden retriever named Flower, a stray who had found his purpose in mourning, whose soul seemed stitched together by grief and memory. The morning sun spread its golden brush across the horizon, filtering through branches that now bore new leaves of spring. Birdsong returned to the trees, and the breeze carried warmth. But even in the freshness of the season, there remained a certain solemnity on the gravel path that led to Elena's grave. And there he was again. Flower came as he always did, this time with a delicate pink carnation. His limp was more noticeable. Now age had begun to settle into his bones. His fur, once honey gold, looked dusted with gray, but nothing would stop him. His heart still led his paws forward. As he approached the gravestone, he paused. A breeze passed gently through the cemetery, causing the flower to flutter slightly in his jaws. He laid it down with as much care as he had on day one. Then, as always, he sat. And as always, he stared at the stone, still and silent. But something was different this morning. A man stood off to the side just beyond the iron gate. He wore an old army jacket, frayed at the cuffs, and a cap that shaded his weathered face. His name was Charles, and he had come seeking answers, not just about the dog, but about the woman beneath the headstone. Elena. Charles had served 2 tours overseas. When he returned home, everything felt foreign. He had lost friends, sleep, and a piece of himself in the desert sands. He'd come to this town only to settle his late uncle's estate. He never expected to find meaning in a graveyard. He had seen the post online, the dog who brought flowers every day, but what caught his eye wasn't just the image, it was the name etched in stone. Elena Monroe. He remembered her. They had grown up on opposite ends of the same city. In high school, she was the girl who brought stray animals to class and carried dog treats in her backpack. He was the quiet one, always sketching warplanes in his notebook. They weren't close, but she had smiled at him once. Really smiled. And he had never forgotten. Now here he was, standing over her grave, wondering if the universe had nudged him back toward a thread he didn't know still tied them together. Flower looked up at him. Their eyes met. And in that glance, Charles felt something shift. The dog didn't growl, didn't move, just looked. Charles approached slowly, not wanting to startle him. "Hey there, boy," he whispered, his voice cracking from disuse and emotion. "You miss her too, huh?" Flower didn't answer, of course, but he lowered his head and gently pressed his paw against the stone like he had done so many times before. Charles sat beside him. "I knew her," he said softly, not sure why he was even saying it. Maybe to the dog, maybe to himself. "She used to rescue dogs in high school, I remember. There was a little beagle once, got hit by a car. Everyone just stood around, but not Elena. She ran out into traffic and carried that pup all the way, to the vet." Flower's ears twitched. Charles chuckled. "Yeah, she was always like that. I heard she stayed in town. Became a vet tech, right?" He turned to look at the grave, then back at the dog. "Were you hers?" Silence. But something, in Flower's eyes, answered, "Yes, I was." Charles sighed. "I wonder what happened. She couldn't have been that old." It took Martha, who had quietly walked up from behind, to speak the truth. "Cancer," she said gently. "Fast. Aggressive. She didn't tell many people. Went in quietly, just like she lived." Charles looked at her, stunned. "You knew her?" "I helped keep this place up," she replied. "Elena used to bring Flower here sometimes, even before she passed. Said it was peaceful. I think she knew." Charles glanced back at the dog. "And he just kept coming?" "Every single day," Martha said, her voice thick. "Since the day they buried her." Charles didn't know what to say. He simply sat there, his hand brushing against Flower's fur. The dog didn't flinch. For a moment, all three sat in silence. A man, a woman, and a dog, tied together by the memory of someone who had touched them all in different ways. "I think she would have liked this," Charles murmured. "Being remembered like this, with flowers, by someone who loved her enough to never stop coming." Martha nodded. "It's more than most people get." That night, Charles couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Flower, about how much pain the dog must feel every morning and yet still return, how he had made the journey through rain, snow, heat, and illness, just to honor someone he loved. Charles had medals in a drawer that meant less to him than that act of love. The next morning, when Flower arrived at the cemetery, he found a surprise, waiting. A freshly painted bench now stood just a few feet from Elena's grave. On it was a plaque that read, "In memory of Elena Monroe, a friend to all creatures, great and small." Beneath it, in smaller letters, "Love never ends." Charles sat on the bench as Flower approached, holding a marigold in his mouth. The dog looked up at him, then walked past and laid the flower at the stone like always. Then, this time, he did something different. He turned back and curled up at Charles's feet. The man didn't move, just lowered his hand and gently stroked the dog's head. For the first time in years, Charles felt his chest loosen. The tightness, the fear, the endless weight. It began to lift. Maybe Elena had brought them together. Maybe Flower was the thread that stitched broken people whole again. Whatever it was, it felt like healing. And as the sun rose a little higher in the sky, spilling light across the grave, the flowers, and the old soldier's lap, Flower closed his eyes and rested. Not alone, Not anymore. Time, in the quiet spaces between morning and memory, has a strange way of folding in on itself. Days began to blend for Charles and Flower, not in dull repetition, but in gentle ritual, each morning sacred, each flower an offering not just to Elena's grave, but to the love that refused to die with her. Charles, once a man lost in the shadows of war and ghosts of the past, found himself returning to the cemetery long before Flower arrived. The wooden bench he'd had installed was worn smooth from use, his sketchbook always in hand. He'd begun drawing again. Not warplanes, not deserts or ruins. He drew Flower. Over and over. The curve of his ears, the gentle drape of his tail, the determined line of his limp. He captured him in charcoal and ink like he was trying to preserve something that already felt like legend. Martha often joined them, sometimes with thermoses of warm tea and biscuits. She'd chat idly, telling stories of Elena's childhood, how she'd been the girl who once climbed a tree to rescue a kitten stuck on the roof, how she once organized a fundraiser at just 10 years old to pay for a shelter dog's surgery. Every word stitched new layers onto the picture Charles was forming of her. He realized he hadn't truly known Elena in life, but through Flower and Martha he was slowly learning her soul. One cloudy afternoon, Charles noticed something different in Flower. He didn't move with the same energy. His steps were slower. When he laid the flower down, a purple wild violet today, he didn't sit tall like usual. Instead, he slumped. His breathing was heavier, the kind of slow, deliberate rhythm that made Charles sit up straighter. "Hey, boy," he said softly, kneeling down beside him. "You all right?" Flower didn't look up. His head rested on his paws in a way that screamed fatigue deeper than sleep could mend. Charles reached out, running a hand through the thinning fur. It felt warm. Too warm. Concern twisted through his gut. That evening, Charles took Flower with him. It was the first time the dog left the cemetery grounds in months, maybe years. At first, Flower hesitated, glancing back toward the gravestone. But Charles whispered, "You'll be back tomorrow, I promise." And the dog, as if understanding, allowed himself to be led away. At the local animal clinic, the vet, a kind woman named Dr. Lynn, took one look and sighed. "How old is he?" she asked. Charles shook his head. "I don't know. He's been at Elena Monroe's grave every day since she died." The vet's expression softened. "Oh, you're talking about that dog, the one in all those stories. He's a bit of a legend." She knelt beside Flower, examining him gently. After a full evaluation, her diagnosis came like a whisper none of them wanted to hear. "He's got heart failure," she said quietly. "Advanced. I can give him some meds to ease the symptoms, but—" Her voice faded. "He doesn't have much time." Charles felt something crack deep in his chest. He thanked her, took the medicine, and paid the bill without a word. On the ride back, Flower sat beside him in the passenger seat, wrapped in an old flannel blanket Charles had found in the truck. The dog's eyes never left the window. He watched the world pass by like a soldier on his final march. That night, Charles didn't sleep. He lay on the couch. Flower curled up at the foot of it. The silence between them was comfortable, but not without weight. It was the silence of final pages being turned, of days counting down like whispered prayers. When dawn finally broke, pale and golden, Charles helped Flower into the truck again. They went back. The cemetery felt colder that morning. The sky was overcast, the wind tugging at the dried petals of flowers that had long since wilted. But today something new rested beside Elena's stone. Charles had brought it, a bouquet of white lilies, her favorite, bundled with twine and tied to a drawing. A sketch of Flower, sitting proudly with a single rose in his mouth. Flower moved slower than ever, but he moved with purpose. His paws dragged slightly in the dewy grass. Charles walked beside him, hand ready in case he faltered. When they reached the stone, Flower laid down the pink daisy he carried today, his last flower, and then He laid down beside it, not just to sit, to rest. Truly rest. Charles knelt next to him, the weight of what was coming sinking like lead into his bones. "You don't have to keep coming," he whispered. "She knows. She knows, Flower. You've shown her every day." The dog lifted his head weakly, nudged his nose against the gravestone, and gave a soft, almost inaudible whine. Then he closed his eyes. Martha arrived minutes later, her footsteps faltering when she saw the scene before her. Charles sat beside the dog, a hand on his back, head bowed. Flower was still like the trees in winter, like the stone under Elena's name. "Is he?" she asked softly. Charles nodded. His throat was too tight to speak. Martha knelt, tears brimming in her eyes. She placed a daffodil on the ground beside him. "He waited as long as he could," she whispered. He wanted to be sure she wasn't alone. They buried Flower just beside Elena's grave. The cemetery board made an exception. Martha called in a favor. The town agreed. A small stone was placed there a week later. Flower, the loyal heart. He carried love in his mouth and never left her side. The story spread further. News outlets, social media, a short documentary. People all over the world cried at the devotion of one golden retriever who carried flowers to a grave every single day until his body couldn't carry him anymore. But to Charles, it wasn't about headlines. It was about a dog who taught him how to feel again. About grief that didn't rot but bloomed. About a woman he barely knew who had saved lives not just with medicine, but with kindness. On the anniversary of Flower's passing, Charles brought 2 flowers, one for Elena, one for the dog who never gave up on her. He sat between their graves, sketchbook open, drawing a new picture. It was of all 3 of them, Elena, Flower, and himself, standing under the oak tree at the edge of the cemetery, with wind in their hair and peace in their eyes, and in the sky above them floated a single perfect flower, unwilted, eternal. A year had passed since Flower's final walk. The cemetery, once quiet and unnoticed, had become a place of pilgrimage, not the bustling, loud kind that overwhelmed places of fame, but a soft-footed, respectful flow of visitors, each carrying a single flower. People came not just from across the state, but from different corners of the country, even the world. Some brought their own dogs. Some came alone. Some knelt at Elena's grave. Others wept quietly beside Flower's stone, whispering stories of their own loss, love, and longing. The town had renamed the small path leading to the gravesite. It was now called Loyal Lane. A hand-painted wooden sign stood at the entrance, featuring a sketch Charles had made of Flower, rose in his mouth, tail curled to the side, eyes full of purpose. Charles was different now. Not healed, he would never call it that, but whole, in a new way. Flower had changed something in him that decades of therapy, medication, and medals never had. There was no longer just emptiness when he woke. There was purpose. A quiet, steady hum of something sacred and soft. Some mornings he'd come early to the cemetery, just as the dew clung to the blades of grass, and he'd sketch whatever moved him. The morning birds, an elderly woman laying tulips at her husband's grave, or simply the silhouette of 2 stones side by side beneath an oak. He spoke to Flower like an old friend. "I still see you in my dreams," he said once, voice thick with emotion, always carrying that flower like it was your heart. Sometimes Martha would join him. They didn't always talk. Sometimes they just sat, letting the wind move through them. Occasionally Martha would reach down and rest her hand atop Flower's gravestone, murmuring, "You brought us all together, didn't you, sweetheart?" One day Charles received a letter. It came in a crisp white envelope, written in tight cursive. Inside was a small photo of a golden retriever puppy, bright-eyed, with a flower in his mouth and a letter. "Dear Mr. Whitmore, I don't know if you remember me. My name is Clara. I'm one of the nurses who cared for Elena Monroe when she was in the hospital. I saw your story on the news and cried for days. I wanted to tell you something I never got a chance to before she passed. Elena told me she used to rescue strays, not just Flower, so many others. She once said, "I don't want anyone to die feeling like they were unloved." After seeing Flower's story, I adopted this little guy from a kill shelter. He had the same eyes. I named him Bloom, because Flower would want something beautiful to grow in his place. Thank you for sharing your story. You've changed more lives than you'll ever know. With love, Clara Charles stared at the photo for a long time. Then he placed it in his sketchbook and drove to the shelter. Not to adopt, but to sit. To be near the noise, the scent, the life. He ended up returning the next day, and the day after. Eventually, he was volunteering 3 times a week. Walking, dogs, sketching portraits of the ones that got adopted and gifting them to the families. One wall of the shelter became known as Flower's Wall, covered in sketches of every dog who found a new home. Each drawing had a tiny flower doodled in the corner. People started telling their own stories under those drawings. He waited by the door for a year after my dad died. She followed my daughter to school every day, like a guardian. He was abandoned, but he still wagged his tail when we came. The grief of the world echoed Flower's tale, but so did its hope. One afternoon, a little boy, no older than 10, came to visit the graves with his parents. He carried a yellow daffodil clenched in a tight fist. His dog, a 3-legged beagle, mix named Toby, hobbled beside him, tongue lolling out in joy. The boy stopped in front of Flower's grave. "Mom said this dog was a hero," he whispered, kneeling down. "So I wanted to say thank you." He placed the daffodil on the stone. "Me and Toby, we're best friends too." Charles stood nearby, unseen, a tear tracking down his weathered cheek. That evening, he added a new sketch to his book, Toby, and the boy framed by morning light standing beside Flower's grave. Then one spring morning, as petals began to blossom along the oaks, Charles returned to the cemetery with something different. He brought no pencil, no sketchbook, just a small flower, a deep red camellia. He knelt between the 2 graves, one hand on each stone. "I've been thinking," he said softly, "about how love, it doesn't end when life does. It changes form. It carries forward in gestures, in rituals, in flowers." He smiled. "I think Flower was trying to show us that all along." He laid the camellia down. "I'm not saying goodbye," he whispered. "I'm saying thank you." As he stood, the wind picked up. A single petal broke free from the flower and danced upward, lifted by the breeze. It floated, light and steady, circling the graves once, and then drifting off toward the trees. Charles watched it go, heart full. Later that week, the town unveiled a small bronze statue, commissioned by donations from all over the world. It stood at the start of Loyal Lane. It depicted Flower, mid-step, Flower in his mouth, eyes fixed forward with purpose. The plaque read, "He never missed a day, because love remembers, even when the world forgets." If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, comment, and share it with someone who loves dogs as much as you do. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more emotional and inspiring dog stories. Your support means everything to us in these stories.